Hi, I'm Ted Haftagaber, founder and producer of Live Talks Los Angeles. Thanks for joining us. Since we started over a decade ago, we have brought you hundreds of conversations with storytellers, writers, actors, musicians, humorists, chefs, and thought leaders in business and science. You can watch and hear most of these in our YouTube channel and our podcast. For details, visit livetalksla.org. And now, here's the show you've tuned in to see. We welcome Lin-Manuel Miranda, Quiara Alegría Hudes, and Jeremy McCarter to Live Talks Los Angeles. They'll discuss their book, In the Heights, Finding Home. Lin-Manuel is an award-winning composer, lyricist, and performer, as well as the recipient of a 2015 MacArthur Foundation Award. His most recent musical, Hamilton, book, music, and lyrics by Miranda, and he also originated the title role, which opened on Broadway in 2015. Hamilton was awarded the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for Drama and earned a record-breaking 16 Tony Award nominations, winning 11. Quiara is the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright of Water by the Spoonful and author of a memoir, My Broken Language. She wrote the book for the Tony-winning Broadway musical, In the Heights, and later adapted it for the screen. Jeremy is the author of Young Radicals and co-author with Lin-Manuel Miranda of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Hamilton, The Revolution. Welcome to all of you. Let's start with our first question, and then I'm going to let you guys converse and tell us your feelings, your thoughts from the beginning, from when the book came out, from when the movie came out, and then we will address some questions that our audience sent in. My first question for you, and this comes from a word that is in the title of the book, what is your sense of home? Is it a place or is it something other than that?
Starting with small little topics.
Well, yeah.
You were away from home when you started writing. You really.
I was homesick when I started writing this thing. I was a sophomore at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. And if I could sum up what is home in one sentence, I don't think we'd have a 2.5-hour musical on our hands, because I think it's maybe the most loaded word in the English language. And but it's really interesting. I was, for the first time, living in a Latino program house with other kids my age. They were all first generation, second generation Latino kids. Some of the kids in my house, their parents were bodega owners or came to this country or grew up in New York City, and they were second generation, but Puerto Rican, Dominican, Mexican, Colombian. And we all had to write an essay to get into the house of how we were going to be Latino leaders on campus. It was a really nice house. It was worth writing an essay to get into. It was across from the Center for the Arts, which is where I was declaring my major. And what I found was a group of students and friends who had the same cultural bilingualism I had. Not to say could speak English and Spanish, but could speak fluent Latin pop culture and American pop culture. And so that's when I realized I was only tapping half of that for my creative work in my life. I had written 2 short musicals in high school, but they didn't touch on my Latinidad at all, really. I love Jonathan Larson, so they sounded like Jonathan Larson knockoffs. And so In the Heights was my first attempt to do several things. 1, write a full-length musical, full stop. 2, bring more of myself into my work by setting it in Northern Manhattan, where I grew up. And 3, reaching for the music that I listened to at home, but didn't always bring into my work, salsa and bachata and reggaeton and merengue and hip hop, and just bringing all of myself to the table. So, again, getting back to what is home, I think that there's two kinds of home. There's the kind you're born in, and then there's the kind you create for yourself. And I think in the Heights, once we settled on that as a theme, Quiara, really coalesced on both those types of home. What do you think?
Yeah, I think what resonates for me is you saying that it's the house, it's where we come from, and it's also the home that we build. For me, home is I'm going to get a little more philosophical. Yours was so concrete. Like West Philly is home. I haven't lived there since 2000. Even going to the ocean, which I was not raised by, is like home. My heart is like primordial home. My heart beats differently. I'm home when I'm at the ocean. But I think that yin yang sense of it's where you come from, but it's also what you make. And I think the part of home for me that I was grappling with as we started writing In the Heights, the first draft of yours that I read, that gave me an idea, like to make this a piece about home and a piece about community, is that for me, home is the place where your community and your individualism are not at odds. It's that moment when they can coexist together. If it's too much, like you're just in community and you're just following kind of the rules and culture and vibe of the group, you lose yourself, right? But if you can find a way to balance all the weird things and the incongruous things that live in your heart and that make you an individual, that make you want to leave and come back, that make you want to say something different from the group, though, to me, that perfect balance is home. And I think that you can really see that in the Heights. Nina is trying to figure out. She was kind of like doing the group thing a little bit too much as a young person. She wanted to be her community's hopes and dreams, and then she realized like she had not paid enough attention to like what's her own individual path, and now she has to grapple with those two things. How do you find and balance those? And same with Usnavi. He's, what about what he wants? What about what the community wants? And how do you find harmony even when those things are dynamic and shifting every day?
That makes sense to me. I mean, I'll say one of the big discoveries at the very beginning of this process, the three of us doing this book together, it was something that I thought might be true. And I remember, Lynn, like having this phone call with you back in like 2019 when we first started kicking the ideas around for this book, but about sort of which character the two of you relate to. I mean, you relate to all of them, of course, because you created these characters, but the sense that In the Heights is a record of a neighborhood, an actual place on the island of Manhattan, where, Lynn, like you spent your childhood, in Quiara, you've lived there for years and years now. But it's also a place that didn't exist, that you wanted to exist. There's this like yearning built in, this, like, as Quiara, as you just said, a place where sort of all the pieces, all the incongruous parts like fit and make sense. And one of the things that was striking to me is, and Lynn, maybe both of you could speak to this, but it's like the ways that you're Usnavi, the storyteller, like that's pretty obvious. But the way that you're Nina, the person who's not just looking for a home, but wondering, is there a home for me someplace? Like that's something that like I didn't immediately see from the outside. How did you like, and I know Nina like took forever for you guys to get right. Like it took years and years to get Nina right, but like, what is it like? What was it like then? What's it like now to feel that sort of Nina-ish approach, that Nina-ish view on looking for a place where everything fits?
How many songs did we write for Nina before we landed on Breathe? Because we were balancing several things. One, first of all, Nina had a brother that was kind of gumming up the works the first couple of years. In that there was Nina's storylines, which were, she was coming home from school, but she was also falling in love with Benny in real time. And so a lot of the first early Nina song the first Nina song in college before Quiara came on board was Nina coming home from Yale. And she was just taking the Metro North train home, which didn't feel felt weird that she'd be gone all year if she was only a Metro North train away. So we sent her further. But we had this love story with Benny. And so there were several drafts where the first time we meet Nina, she's getting picked up by Benny from the airport. And we're seeing, she was only kind of defined by her flirtation with Benny. And it was like, whoa, you grew up. Yes, I did. What's this? There was a song called The Long Way Around. There was a song called Almost Home. And a lot of them were literally and this is such a New Yorker thing, like the literal journey from JFK to Washington Heights. And yeah, so method. And then something interesting happened, which was that we kind of been constantly balancing Nina and Lincoln's storylines. And once Lincoln went away, Nina was able to absorb all of Lincoln's complexity. Lincoln had sort of issues with his father and wanting to be his own man and wanting to have this artistic career, but his father wanted to give him the family business. And once you took all that away and gave it to Nina and gave it to her in the form of expectations that her parents placed on her, suddenly Nina became a lot more complex and had a lot more to deal with when she got here. And so it wasn't about a literal trip from JFK to New York. It was, what does it mean to reemerge in this place that when I left was like waving and cheering, and I am very much not in that place. And so the first real stab at that was a song called My Fire Escape, where she was sort of singing about the neighborhood, but seeing it from a distance. But it gave us, it was a practical issue to meet one of our leads high up on a fire escape far from the audience. Like we wanted to literally be closer to her. And so that morphed into Breathe. And Breathe is probably the 20th song in that slot. But again, like the logistics and the emotional logistics kind of were coalescing at the same time of like, what does it mean to be here when everyone has a very different view of me than I have of myself? And then the last piece that finally unlocked it was using language to highlight that difference, to have literally everyone singing about her in Spanish and how proud they are of her in Spanish, and her being like, this is unwarranted. You don't know what I've been through in English, even sort of highlighting the contrast, that bridge that makes me cry every time. The mira, Nina, no me preocupo por ella, and her responses in English, and her responses / translations in English. It's that Sondheim thing of like content dictates form, and finally finding the translation form to unlock her cultural dislocation was the last piece that was needed. But it took years and years to get to that moment.
It's really a testament to the writing process and the revision process and drafts. I can see with hindsight, I couldn't quite articulate this while we were just in the thick of it, making it, especially at the O'Neill when Nina's brother kind of had his last gasp. We were trying so hard to unlock the reason why he had to be on stage with these characters, and we couldn't ultimately do it. But really, I think his character was a misunderstood artist, and that the crux of that story was a parent-child conflict. That story is a frame in and of itself. It really wasn't about an individual community conflict. It was really contained to that parent-child relationship. And so, yeah, when we gave that all to Nina, then all of a sudden it kind of clicked in with the larger frame of the community versus individual conflict. And remembering all those drafts, I mean, Lynn, I still stand on the subway platform and hum to myself, almost home. Like, there's so many catchy hooks and songs on the way to the song that works. And Lincoln's songs were also so catchy. I think about them all the time. The thing that happened with Breathe for me that was different, and we've heard this song hundreds of times by many young artists in auditions, on YouTube. Physicalizing and giving voice to what, to me, breathe is don't have a panic attack. That's essentially the action of the song, is don't have a panic attack, breathe. And the directive to self, and how that actually meshes with, in a really cool way, the fact that one has to breathe to sing a song. So she's almost naming her obstacle for getting through the song. I think it's a really cool literalization of what's happening to her physically and emotionally at the moment.
That's interesting. You've seen it, that idea that you've seen all of these things you wrote years ago done and interpreted and reinterpreted. There's a whole chapter in the book about the international productions where, it's a chance to find out what's it like when you do this show in a completely different cultural context. Here's a question. When the three of us all had to do kind of a deep dive to make this book, I guess everyone who is listening to us when this is going to be shared is either got the book or the book is coming, but Lin had to go back to his songs to annotate them, and Quiara went back to the many drafts of the scripts and the screenplay. And I talked to dozens and dozens of people all over the planet about this show. And for me, there were surprises like big and small and what I learned, but I was coming in from the outside. And I've been wondering genuinely for the two of you, the going back in time that you both had to do, or I guess the stuff that you saw the other two people on this call doing, did things surprise you? Like, were there things you didn't know about the show that you made or the movie that you made that came out in the course of us making this book?
I'll say I learned a lot about Quiara's process in the screenplay that I did not know. Like she says things plainly in this book that I only sort of understood at a gut level. I understood the screenplay was great. And I understood that it took really bold moves in updating the story, but the framing, you talk about who we relate to, which characters we relate to in the story in your previous question. And the fact that now Usnavi is a married father with a small business. That's like literally where I'm at. I always sort of said to folks, I'm really not Usnavi, I'm closer to Nina. Now I watch the movie, I go, I'm actually Usnavi in the last scene of the movie. That's the one I'm literally closest to, married to a woman named Vanessa and raising a family. In literal sense. But so many of the sort of smart decisions that went into that frame, and I, again, hadn't articulated it till I saw it in the book, but like the addition of a fourth generation to this storyline. In our play, it is Abuela's generation, it is the Rosarios, Daniela's generation, and then it is Usnavi, Benny, Nina, Vanessa's generation, and then there's Sunny. It's a fifth generation. There's Sunny, who's the youngest generation, and then there's Usnavi's kids. So it really becomes, what is that little girl going to do once she's got Papi's hat? Like it's such a wonderful way. It's really kind of genius. And so again, those were things that I didn't understood until I saw Quiara articulate them in our book.
For me, the process of writing, I learned so much in the book, especially about productions that I didn't attend, that were global or that were national, that I wasn't part of. But then also, again, about Lin, I think reading the annotations to the lyrics, when we're making the lyrics and when we're making the dialogue and we're making the story, it's kind of messy, and it really feels like you're just kind of walking through a swamp, and every once in a while you see a beautiful lily growing on a tree, but there's a lot of swamp. In hindsight, just articulating how we got to those lilies and kept them, the annotations to Lin's lyrics really feel like a roadmap to his brain. Like you can almost see the circuitry, which is really cool. How often, as an artist, this is what I nerd out on, like what is going on inside the artist that leads from a literally empty page to a finished piece. And so to see the circuitry there, it's really cool. As an artist, I just geek out on that. Lin has a very encyclopedic and detailed thought process and memory, which is no surprise to anyone that knows his work and knows his lyrics. But it's another window onto that and how that functions. I don't think my brain is anything like that. So it's also just kind of a marvel for me to behold. The other thing I learned about, as I mentioned, was productions I hadn't been to, and it helped me see with hindsight how I think also one of the things that characters are grappling with in The Heights is that home is ephemeral for them. And theater is also ephemeral, and to see these items that people held onto, like a prop, like a hair comb or a hat, a little bit of evidence of something ephemeral and meaningful in their life, that resonated. I found that quite beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to the home question for a second, I guess I skipped answering it, but it's like, it does, I guess it can be a place, right? I mean, it can be, like, I was just back in my old neighborhood in New York where I lived for 13 years. And there's something just like visceral about like the look of the way the light hits the brick, and it's sort of, it's below consciousness. It just sort of shifts your cells in a certain way. And then I think it's like the people and the networks, it's the connections between, it's whether it's a community or whether it's a group of friends or whether it's just something in the way that you sort of fit or don't in the rhythm of the people in a place. And to the extent that it has something to do with memory, I mean, it hooks back into the shape of the book. I mean, the shape of the book, it was partly inspired by a specific song in the stage version, Everything I Know. And Quiara, I guess now I can admit this, but like we had this idea very early on, like, what would be cool? Like, what if it wasn't just the three of us, our three voices, but because this is so much a show and now a film about community, let's include lots of other voices. Like, let's find those people who saved a prop or something and have them explain to us why, in their words, it's important, what it meant to them. And, it's sort of like Everything I Know. It's like this song from the show where Nina looks at the album and her memory like helps tell her who she is. And I remember it's sort of talking that idea through with you on the phone, Quiara, like very early in this process. And you were like, Everything I Know is cut. And at the time I was like, okay, yeah, sure. Totally work with that. Totally work with that. And in my head, I'm like, oh, okay. So does it still work? I guess it still works.
It still works.
They're going through Abuela's things. So in the stage version, they sit on Abuela's stoop, and they've been packing up her things after she passes, and they find, it's like she saved that's a lyric. She saved everything we gave her, every little scrap of paper. So now they're facing these papers. They're facing the evidence, the receipts of their lives. It's different when you're touching the paper that you touched when you were writing the book report at 9 years old. It's different when you feel the grooves of the pen, in that book report versus just remembering it as some sort of kind of hypothetical image in your head. I have to address cutting it. That was a really hard cut to make, though actually it was clear to me that it had to be cut, but it's one of my favorite songs in the show. And I feel so attached, especially to the memory of Mandy Gonzalez singing that song. Like, sometimes a performer and a song happen to each other at the proper moment in the universe. Like, you can feel, the performer is going through that in their life right now too. Maybe not literally, but metaphorically. And every time Mandy sang that in Act 2, I felt that something about who she was at that time was also cataloging her life, looking back and saying, like, what are my receipts and where do I go from here? It really touched me.
Yeah. And I had the best seat in the house because I got to sit next to her for 2 of the 3 verses.
Yeah. I want that seat. But in the screenplay, what I found quickly was that I tried so hard to make it work, but somehow the audience, the viewer, would just get ahead of the song because she's describing things that we can see. On stage, you have to describe something as small as a book report or a lottery ticket because the back row of the audience can't see it. So letting it live in the words is the way for the audience to experience it on screen. I can just show this stuff, and it has happened.
We're there, and we're doing the journey in her eyes.
Yeah. So that was a hard one to cut, but I love the thought that they're two different experiences, and that you can go and see the musical and fall in love with moments and songs, and that you have to kind of open yourself to having a different experience with the film and fall in love with different moments and different songs.
Yeah. I mean, it's a thread, I think, Lynn, that runs through this book and the Hamilton book. Like, you know, a lot of the impulse behind both of these stories is like hopefully making it a little easier for young artists coming up to understand, like, this is how it might feel if you want to follow in this path, if you're inspired by what you've seen and you want to do your version of these stories. And there is like an unbelievable discipline and toughness about cutting things you love. You know, the old saying, like, killing your darlings. Like,
Yeah.
just, I saw you do it. I watched you do it with Hamilton's great stuff I loved. I'm still mad at you about that you had to cut, and I get that you had to cut it.
I will be getting shit for cutting congratulations as long as I live. But I'm telling you, you want to hear from Eliza
Right.
after the Reynolds pamphlet. I'm telling you, we tried it the other way, and that's okay. Like, again, like I think that it's important I think it's important to show receipts. I think it's important to show that your first draft is not the perfect draft. It's because I think Hamilton had the spine of Hamilton's life that has fewer cut songs in it. Whereas, you know, In the Heights was the ever-changing Rubik's Cube. We'd figure out one side, and then that would remove the stickers on the other side of the Rubik's Cube, because we were figuring out plot, story, characters, all at once. I think it's just it's so important to show writers that, like, it's the first draft is not what ends up on stage. Like, writing is rewriting, and it's important to stay connected to the impulse of why you started writing. That's the hard thing to hang on to, but writing is rewriting. I'm saying this to you now, knowing that we're downstairs from here. We are locking my movie Tick Tick Boom, and we have cut a song. And I will hear about it. But I'm telling you, in a movie, we don't need the song. But the version on stage, it's a very good song. And that's part of the adaptation process.
So wait, to back up a step, you said, like, there's a difference, right? I mean, you have Hamilton's actual life. You can hang things on that. And that's why they're your songs. But here's a question. Like, there's also the difference in you having In the Heights behind you. I mean, you had made one, and you have the skill that comes along with the experience. What do you think would happen? What would you, let's play out in the multiverse, you go on a vacation in 1999 instead of in 2008 and pick up around, or not 1999, let's say it's 2003, Heights hasn't happened for some reason. You pick up Chernows biography. What do you think, like, young Lin would have done with that story? Would it still come out the way that Hamilton actually came out? Or would you have found a different way into it, or done something different?
It's impossible to be able to tell. I know that, again, and this is a lesson I continue to try to remember, that I picked up that book on my first vacation from Heights in 8 years. We went right from writing the show to performing in the show 8 times a week. And that book happened on my first vacation. So the lesson is, take more vacations and take more breaks. Run away with us for the summer. And so again, I was in a moment when I was ready to receive anything that wasn't In the Heights. And I feel very lucky that this very incredible story was the book I picked off the bookstore shelf that day. But again, if I'd read it in 2003, I was still figuring out how to pay monthly rent. In 2003, I was still teaching 7th grade English and subbing to supplement my 7th grade English salary. So who knows where that would have landed? It would have been one of many books I was reading because I was teaching To Kill a Mockingbird and teaching Midsummer Night's Dream. I was in a totally different mode. I wasn't receptive.
You know, Lynn, you called me as you were on the path to doing Hamilton at the Public Theater. And I'm sure I'm not the only person you called with this question, but up until then, you had played me some songs as you were developing them for Hamilton, and the working title was Hamilton Mixtape. And so you called to just kind of take my temperature as, you know, someone on the outside about whether that was the right title or whether Hamilton was the right title. And I feel like if you had started writing Hamilton in 2003, you would have written the Hamilton Mixtape. That might be confusing now because it became an album that of other people doing their tape center songs, but that was the original concept for the musical itself. And I think post Heights Lin understands more that, you know, you didn't have to signal that it was a mixtape, that the story is and your musical style is, and that's sufficient, and it's more than sufficient. It's abundant and it's exciting, you know. Yeah, In the Heights was the mixtape days. Literally,
Right.
we're making more mixtapes.
Literally, we were making each other mixtapes.
You were making so many mixtapes, you didn't even have time to like write, like Sharpie on the CD what the tape, like I had so many like blank CDs from you and I didn't know which was which, you know. It was mixtape days.
Yeah, and my opening night gifts to everyone were character specific mixtapes. That was what I spent opening day doing. That's my love language is curating music for people, whether it's original music I write or hear artists that I know you will like.
Yeah, I remember 2015 when you gave them to the Hamilton cast. You had like a baggie full of thumb drives, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Just like sort of you're shuffling through, like looking through keys and handing them out to people as they came to your dressing room.
Yeah, that's how it's adapted. Now, I guess I would send them a link to a playlist, but it hasn't changed. It's still my favorite thing to do.
Yeah. So
wait, I want to, Jeremy, I'm dying to ask you this question if I can, because, you know, I've been so curious. Like, I first knew your name as, you know, a critic who wrote an important review or criticism piece of In the Heights off Broadway. And it was a good feeling. We were young writers, and there was a sense of like, what he's describing is what we were describing when we were talking about what do we want to write, what kind of thing do we want to write. And you said something like, if Do the Right Thing basically chilled the F out for a minute, it might, you know, In the Heights might be a first cousin of that.
Yeah, other critics were like, it's West Side Story because there's Latinos in it. And I was like, you missed the forest for the trees.
Right. You know,
you're the only one who was picking up what we were putting down.
Like, I'm just curious, as someone who's not ever written a review or criticism, you know, what is the path from sitting in an audience as a critic or as a reviewer, and I don't know what your thoughts on those two words are, to then getting into it and being a participant in the creative journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, Heights has a lot to do with that transition for me, that journey for me. Lin knows this story, but I don't think I've ever told you this, how Heights specifically is like a big part of that for me. So it's worth telling the story because it might shed a little light on the show. Criticism was never a great fit because it's just the math. You end up writing a lot more bad reviews than good reviews because it's really hard to make something good. So if you're honest, you end up panning people's creativity. That's a tough way to live unless you have like a taste for blood or something, or you just don't care. And I cared. I mean, I was always involved somehow on the creative side at the same time. So I sort of could sympathize very easily with what it feels like when people don't get what you're trying to do. I did not grow up, like most of my friends were not theater people. They did not like dig musicals and want to listen to cast albums. I didn't growing up. And so when I got to a position where I got to sort of react to what people were putting on stage, that was in my brain. Like, why? The thing that's exciting about theater, I still feel this, is like it can take you anywhere. You can do anything on stage. You're only bound by the audience's imagination, which is basically limitless. So, you know, if you can do anything, do you really want to do like a domestic drama in like one room that never goes anywhere or does anything? If it's a musical, do you really want a musical that still is following all the conventions of like 1947? Like, you know, when you have access to all of the music, all of the creativity that's happening outside the theater walls, like, where's that? Where are those sounds and those artists? So I wrote this again and again and again. And, you know, from the time I got in, when like the musical everybody was talking about was like the producers, things changed. I'm not saying there's like cause effect to me being in the chair at New York Magazine. I'm just saying, like, I was blessed to see over the course of those couple of years, Spring Awakening arrived with Duncan Sheik's score. Stu arrived with Passing Strange. Even, I mean, you know, to me, I was always the contrarian about like jukebox musicals. Like, why not a jukebox musical? Like, some of those songs are beautiful. And like Jersey Boys came around, and it's like, that's a really good show. It just so happens that the songs have been around for a while. But so I've been excited to see like Broadway changing, musicals changing, and not just Broadway, but like Will Power, MC and playwright, incredibly gifted artist from the Bay Area, was making stuff off Broadway. My late, brilliant, beautiful friend, Michael Friedman, was making things off Broadway and getting them on Broadway. But then along came In the Heights. And I remember vividly, as I described in the introduction, if I could stand in the seat and I could tell you exactly where I was sitting when I saw In the Heights for the first time off Broadway, because the shock of it, of finally feeling like, that's actually what I've been hoping for and arguing about for all these years. Something that just so confidently was bringing these different influences and styles into the theater, doing it with such skill, just like so effortlessly broadening what Broadway was allowed to sound like. That meant a lot to me, to feel like I had the same feeling seeing the show that you had reading my review. And then by the time I got to Broadway, I was like looking around, doing my very frequent check-in with myself. Like, is this what I want to, am I still doing the right thing? Is this how I want to be spending my time? And honestly, like, there was a big difference from the last time I'd asked it, and it was In the Heights, like thriving on Broadway. And I just sort of thought, like, I could keep doing this for more years, but I'm going to be repeating myself. Like, I just feel like I've sort of said what I have to say. I've sort of tried to have a positive case to make and not just be taking apart people's flaws. And it's like, if you want to know what I think about what Broadway should like look and sound like, go see what Lin and Quiara made. Like, that's far enough down the road that I'm only going to be saying the same stuff I've already said. So Lin, you and I met for the first time that summer. It was the summer of 2008. And an opening night of Broadway was like March, I think. Mm-hmm. So yeah. March, I review In the Heights again on Broadway. We meet that summer, and sometime in between then, I'd left. I'd left New York Magazine and gone to Newsweek. That's how quick it happens.
Right.
So in a sense, like In the Heights, like my In the Heights story, is like, it was so enormous a leap forward for what Broadway could do, that someone who was waiting for that leap and like arguing on behalf of that leap felt like, I'm free now. I can sort of walk away and go do something else. So thanks to you both. Because
I remember that first post-show drinks where we met. I took you to a bar where a lot of performers went after their shows, and it was like, people were like, oh, he panned. I saw performers walk by, like, that guy panned my show. And I was like, oh, you've still got reviewer on you.
Yeah. I mean, I probably don't now, because I don't, you know, yeah. It's been years and years. I haven't written.
I know. It was still fresh. And I think I'd started reading the Chernow book, and I was on my way to vacation.
Yeah. The first time
quite a fulcrum, quite a moment where we met. Allowed these two books to happen.
The first time we drank too much was that before you went on that trip, and you told me what your next project was going to be. And I thought it was crazy. It is crazy. It's a crazy idea, but you know, it's a crazy idea that changed the world. So I know we're supposed to get some questions from the audience. So maybe Ted wants to check back in at this point.
Yes, here are some questions. Let us start with this one. I'd like to know more about your respective processes of creativity vis-a-vis collaboration. You seem to work so well together. How does that work?
Do work well together. I mean, I can't imagine writing a musical is so hard, and I can't imagine writing one with someone that you don't work well with. I mean, it's just, how is it possible? You know, the task of just discovering the thing and articulating the thing is more than enough. it's weird because we're both pacing in our separate creative spaces. Like, you know, Lynn is taking a walk in the morning through Isham Park. Like, I'm walking by the river, and we're like voicing Nina in our head, and we're like trying to understand what dad has to say to Benny about the business, you know, and we're like separately doing those things, and then sometimes having epiphanies and writing the good stuff, and then coming together and then kind of stealing from each other's good stuff, and that keeps going on and on. And so there has to be, I think, a very clear shared goal or mission. There has to be, you know, I like something Jeremy said earlier in the conversation, that he said home is rhythm. And I think collaboration is rhythm too. So you have to find someone that you can really, you know, jam out with on a rhythmic level. And so that back and forth with me and Lynn always felt really fun, and it felt like the group.
And really easy. And I have a weird thing, which is that I have to sit still to write the music because I've got to be at a piano, but I got to be moving to write the lyrics. Like, I have to be up and animated and moving. And sometimes that's in the form of walking through Isham Park, which is a great park to walk through. And sometimes it's just like skateboarding back and forth through my apartment. And if there was a time lapse of me and Quiara writing, it's her talking to herself hunched over a computer while I'm just kind of keep spiragraphing out and back and out and back and out and back. That's kind of how we would meet. And then I have to just sort of give enormous credit to the two directors who shaped Heights so beautifully. Tommy, by setting down the dictum really early, like before any of us had any kind of structure in our lives, let's meet every Friday. Just to know that we were all going to meet on Friday, whether we had a line or 3 scenes or a whole song, we're meeting every Friday. It gave structure to our lives and allowed us to shape our lives around this piece and creating this piece. And of course, with our other collaborators, Alex and Bill and later Andy. And then, you know, in the film version of that with John, because, you know, the number of departments multiplies when you're a movie. And so John is getting information from Chris Scott, his head choreographer, and Chris's tentacles of associate choreographers, each of whom specialize in all these incredible different styles. And Alice is incredible director of photography. And so there's more voices in the room, but John doesn't make it feel like that. John makes it feel like we're all in the room and we're figuring out the best way to tell the story. And so again, like, both those folks are very good at creating an atmosphere where the best idea wins. And even before we're in the room with them, we're having fun skateboarding around and talking to ourselves.
I think another reason why having a good collaborative flow is so important is that when conflicts do arise, and they could be interpersonal conflicts, but I'm talking more about conflicts like, you know, what is the deal with Lincoln? What is the deal with Nina? Why does this matter? Why does this not working? When those conflicts arise, you really want the collaborative energy to feel good so that the stuff that's not working is clear. And, you know, by contrast, so you can really hone in on that stuff and have to kind of fight for and articulate your thinking. And in that fighting for an articulation process, which again is swampy, you know, it's not like you have some clear reason, you're grappling towards it. You know, the good creative mojo actually brings the conflicts into relief in a helpful way.
Yeah, because you will never write anything perfect. And when you bring it in, there will be the stuff that folks don't get or stuff that doesn't work. And you have a decision to make. 1, you're right, I'll cut it. Or 2, you're wrong, I can get there, but I haven't earned it yet. And let me earn it. And I think we had infinite variations of that whenever we would bring something in together. But the energy was always so positive about it was never like, oh, stinkeroonie, get that out of here. It was never a negative energy. It was sort of like, here's what I'm getting, here's what I'm not getting, and cool. Like, it always forced you to reframe what's important and what the original impulse is.
Next question. is I understand In the Heights was first nurtured when you were a student at Wesleyan University. I'd like to know more about some of that very early creation and then how it came to Broadway.
Sure. Read chapter 1.
Yeah, there's a whole book about that.
Yeah. Chapter 1. What's really cool about I mean, Jeremy remembered stories I had forgotten about, particularly in getting in touch with M. Graham Smith, who was this theater student who was a senior at Wesleyan, who I just worshipped. I just had the biggest talent crush, regular crush, everything crush, and was writing because M. Graham Smith was encouraging me, and really sort of wrote it in the hopes that he would direct it. And he was like, I can't, I'm a senior and I have to do my senior thesis. But the encouragement was enough for me to keep going with the project. And again, that's not faculty. That was not I hadn't really gotten to know the theater faculty at Wesleyan yet, other than my classes on theater history. It was students who were creating work, just as it was at my high school, students creating work, telling me to keep going, and the desire to create. I had a Nina-like practicality about school. I was very aware of the financial burdens my parents were taking on, and so I knew I couldn't just leave with a degree. I had to leave with stuff. If I was going to leave as a writer, I needed to leave with scripts. I knew I needed more than a piece of paper in the world, and I knew that college was time to make stuff. And so In the Heights was really my first attempt at putting all of me into something. And again, like that's the thing that's most important. But like, again, the encouragement from my peers and the nurturing of being in a house with folks like me is sort of the perfect moment that leads to that initial impulse.
Immigrants' Rights has a larger part in the film version than the Broadway musical. Tell us about that motivation and that process of getting it in there.
That was for the screenplay. So it's discussed a little bit. Actually, Lynn, do you want to start by talking about the 96,000 lyric and how that changed over time?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we had this lyric for Sunny that I think we added for Broadway. I don't think it was off Broadway. What about immigration? Politicians be hating. Racism in this nation's gone from latent to blatant. Again, this is written in 2007. So what I was probably talking about was like Pat Buchanan. I was talking about sort of the increasing demonization of specifically southern border immigration when the governor of Arizona, Jan Brewer, introduced this draconian law basically asking people to carry their papers with them at all times. They could be asked for their immigration papers at any moment. We changed the lyric to Arizona be hatin', which I premiered at the ASU Damage in Arizona, which was quite an experience to see in that audience. But again, it was sort of it was a response to sort of a bubbling that has exploded in the past decade, particularly with the last administration, but certainly not going away anytime soon. And so, immigration was just on the front page of the paper in a way that it hadn't been even back in 2007.
Immigration stuff I wanted to expand on. So basically, Abuela Claudia talks about her immigration experience in Paciencia y Fe, but the topic of contemporary immigration was not explicitly really discussed on stage. Yeah. I wanted to, when John Chu and Lynn and I made the decision to make the movie contemporary, as opposed to set when the Broadway show was set, it felt inevitable. I honestly felt like it would have been negligent to write about Washington Heights, which is a Caribbean community, Dominican community, also Central American. Immigration is baked into the fabric of many of our households uptown. And at the same time, the headlines that Lynn was referring to were about family separation. They were about children being taken from their parents' arms. So it was, and many of the Latino artists that I had been writing plays for throughout my career, we actually gathered. We were in such anguish emotionally about it. We didn't even know how to be well, and so we were wondering how, as artists, we could begin to process this real crisis point that affected us as individuals. So that was on my mind and in my heart when I was writing the screenplay. I thought, let me have one of the Dominican characters, be dealing with an immigration issue. And, spoiler alert for people who have not read the book or seen the movie yet, cover your ears, but the decision to have Sonny be undocumented was consciously done because he is also the one who has the least ambivalence about where his home is. Usnavi is like, is home here or is it there? Is it on the island? Nina is like, is home here or is it out in these intellectual circles that are broadening in my life? Sonny's like, there's no question, home is here. New York City, United States of America. My job is to make this nation better. That is Sonny's vibe. So if he's the one who actually has the biggest barrier to civic participation, I just feel for that kid, and I feel for our nation's loss in not enabling that kid to do his great work at full capacity. So that was the decision to get it into the film.
This next question, you've addressed it a little bit, but let's just get into it a little bit more. Art is an important part of social justice. Would you comment on how art ideally supports social justice and how social justice inspires art?
Sure. I mean, I'll start, which is I think they come from the same place. Like, what is the thing that won't leave you alone? I think, the artistic impulse and the social justice impulse come from the same place, which is what is the thing in the world que no te deja quieto, that talks to you while you're in the shower or talks to you in your quiet moments. And sometimes that's an idea, and sometimes that's an injustice, and sometimes they dovetail. And sometimes your art is an outlet to write about the thing. Sometimes the injustices that visit our world will visit your characters. Again, I think that I think audiences are really smart, and we can tell when we're being fed a polemic or being fed an idea inartfully. But I think if your characters are honestly living in the world, they're going to deal with some of the social issues that you deal with. And I think, I think that the social issues that are discussed in the Heights, and again, it's everything from gentrification to immigration to cultural dislocation, racist microaggressions. There's a lot there, but I think they're all come by honestly by our characters and the world they inhabit. And again, your job as an artist is always to meet the moment. What does this character want to say in this moment? And so, I see them coming from the same place. When I was writing that rap for Sonny and him, talking about politicians behaving and racism going from latent to blatant. First of all, I want to think, poor Sonny, you have no idea how bad it's going to get in the next decade. But also, it also comes from the same place as trying to meet the moment as honestly as possible. And so I think often art and social justice go hand in hand, especially because I think art can get to a subcutaneous level in a way that maybe a headline can't. If you read about dreamers and they're just this other, and there's just this sort of political pawn that is happening in an article, that is different from understanding Sonny can't vote because he can't get a driver's license. And you understand that injustice in a different way if Sonny has moved you and Sonny's gotten into your heart. I don't know, Q.
Just to add on briefly about Sonny, I think there was a strategic decision to reveal his status late in the film because that avoids the audience getting to know him at within that box, within that headline, within that issue. So he's not undocumented. He's Sonny, and Sonny has this vibe, and Sonny gives Usnavi a hard time, and Sonny gets Usnavi out of his head when necessary, and it's funny. And he's a teenage boy, and he's, like flirts sometimes in an inappropriate way with the ladies, but also like wants to learn from them, and all these things. He's just a teenage boy. So that when it is revealed that he's undocumented, there was a bit of strategy there, that it's like, oh, and he also has this facet to him. And in fact, we have a tendency to think, because we've read something in headline news for a year, that therefore we know everything about it, case closed. So I also consciously decided that Sonny didn't even, not only did Usnavi and Nina not know about Sonny's status, but Sonny didn't even fully understand the implications of his own status until he was at that rally with Nina, and he discovers, wait, what did she say? I can't get federal aid? I'm not going to be able to go to college. Like so that he is even discovering what his own checkbox means. It's more layered than even he understood. And so that was the decision behind dramatizing his own realizations of what his status brings. Taking a step back, I do remember the first time, I think art and social justice, dance together in many ways. In The Heights in particular, I do remember reading Lin's first draft, and it just struck not his first draft, the first draft of his that I read, but it just struck the most simple chord for me, which is like joy as resistance. That has always been at the center of the piece. The score was so joyous, and I wanted to get on that train for sure.
The only thing I'd add to this is being able to watch this from the outside. One of the, I think, underappreciated points of intersection between art and social justice is there's the industry around, the culture industries confer attention and resources on people. And the success of In the Heights literally changes the world. Somebody like Anthony Ramos, once he's on the cover of a magazine, is always going to be the person who was on the cover of that magazine. John Chu talks about this a lot in the context of Crazy Rich Asians, where it opens up lanes for artists who then have more opportunities to do what they do, but they also have more of a megaphone to call attention to the things that are important to them. And actually, even more than the actors, it's the two of you. I mean, to see what the two of you have done for the causes that mean the most to you, as with the resources and attention that you've been able to marshal since the show was on Broadway, 13 years ago now. So the art spins in the direction of social justice in a way that I think we're getting more and more used to seeing.
Final question for Lin. How has Washington Heights itself changed since the musical?
Oh man, I remember, this is how much. The first Nina song I think I wrote with Quiara on board had a lyric, "A Starbucks on 181st Street, who'll be the next one to go?" But Starbucks has been there 15 years now. I remember thinking that was the beginning of the end of the neighborhood, and it hasn't happened. Certainly there are parts of the neighborhood that have gentrified. There's blocks west of Broadway and Washington Heights where you'd swear you were in Park Slope. It's so many white couples pushing strollers. But at the same time, I noticed, again, as someone who grew up in Northern Manhattan and stayed, there's a lot of artists who grew up there and stayed. And I'm really pleased by that. The fact that we were able to film this on location, on 175th and Audubon, and it still looks like the Washington Heights I remember growing up, is a testament to its resilience. One of the things I'm really happy, again, this did not exist when I was a kid. When you look at 175th on Google Maps now, it says Little Quisqueya, which is a reference to the Dominican Republic. That kind of cementing in our digital consciousness, again, because it's always been an immigrant neighborhood, but the immigrant groups that have arrived there have shifted. It was Irish and Jewish and Italian folks in the last century, and then Latinos from sort of the 50s onwards, Cubans and Puerto Ricans and largely Dominicans in the 1970s, and then more and more Central and South Americans lately. But again, like that seeing little Quisqueya on a map makes it real in a way that it actually can't disappear. The fact that there's a street corner named after the amazing Dominican bachatero Victor, which was, this is a few weeks ago. The fact that our Latino legacy is taking more permanent roots in the neighborhood, I think is really exciting to me, because I think to claim this as a place we grew up and would still continue to like to live in it, please, is really great.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lin-Manuel. Thank you, Quiara. Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks to all of you for watching, and thanks to those who sent in questions. Again, the book is In the Heights, Finding Home, and is available wherever books are sold. Go on gently.